He'll never find out. He trusts you too much. That sentence didn't sound like it was meant for me, but it landed like it was carved into my chest, clean and precise. The kind of quiet betrayal that doesn't shout, doesn't warn, just waits until you're alone to echo louder than anything else in the room. I didn't move when I heard it, didn't push the door open, didn't clear my throat like a man announcing his presence. I just stood there in the hallway of my own house, keys still in my hand, listening to a version of my life I didn't recognize unfold on the other side. My name is Daniel Carter, 36 years old, born and raised in Ohio, the kind of guy who believed in showing up, in loyalty, in the simple idea that if you built something strong enough, it wouldn't crack under pressure, and for years, that belief felt solid, like the hardwood floors beneath my feet or the steady rhythm of a life that made sense on paper. Emily, my wife of 8 years, was the center of that life, the kind of woman people described as warm, effortless, the one who remembered birthdays, hosted family dinners, laughed just a little louder when everyone else was around, and Ryan, my cousin, had always been there too, not just family but something closer, more like a brother you didn't choose but never questioned, someone who showed up to barbecues, helped move furniture, stood next to me at my wedding like he belonged there. That was the version of the world I knew, the one where trust wasn't something you analyzed, it was just there, built into every handshake, every shared glance, every moment you didn't think twice about. But standing there, hearing that sentence float through the half-closed door, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make the air feel thinner, like the house itself had exhaled something I wasn't supposed to hear. I told myself it was nothing, that context matters, that words can sound different when you catch them out of place, and for a second, I almost believed it, almost stepped forward, pushed the door open, and walked in like everything was still intact. But I didn't, because there was something in the tone, something too certain, too calm, like a secret that had been sitting comfortably for a long time. And once you hear that kind of certainty, you can't unhear it. I stayed still, listening to the quiet that followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full, like it's holding something back, and in that silence, I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not even pain, just a cold, steady awareness that whatever I thought I knew about my life might not be true anymore. People think betrayal announces itself, that it crashes in, breaks things, leaves a mess you can point to. But that's not how it starts. It starts small, almost invisible, a sentence you weren't meant to hear, a moment that doesn't fit, a feeling you can't explain, and then it grows, quietly, patiently, until one day you realize the foundation you trusted was never as solid as you believed. I didn't walk into that room, I didn't ask questions, I didn't make a sound, because something in me understood that this wasn't the moment for noise, this was the moment to listen, to watch, to let the truth reveal itself piece by piece. And as I stood there in that hallway, holding my keys like they belonged to someone else's house, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. I wasn't ready to confront it yet, but I was done being the man who didn't see it coming. I stepped back before the floor could creak under my weight, before the moment could turn into something irreversible, and quietly made my way to the kitchen like I had just walked in from work. Like nothing had shifted, like I was still the man who believed his life was exactly what it looked like from the outside, and when Emily came out a minute later, her smile was already in place, easy, familiar. The same one I had seen 1,000 times across dinner tables and family gatherings, and if I had not heard what I heard, I would have believed it without question. That is the dangerous part about trust, it makes everything look real even when it is not. She asked how my day was, casual, light, and I answered the same way, steady, controlled, like I had not just stood 10 feet away from a version of her I did not recognize, and Ryan followed behind her, relaxed as ever, leaning against the counter like he belonged there, like this was just another ordinary evening in a house built on something solid, and I watched him for a second longer than usual, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for something in me to start connecting pieces I did not even know I had been collecting. We talked about nothing, dinner plans, a family barbecue coming up that weekend, the usual rotation of small conversations that fill a room so no one has to look too closely at what sits underneath, and I played my part perfectly, nodded at the right moments, laughed when it was expected, even poured Ryan a drink like I had done countless times before, but inside, everything had slowed down, every movement felt deliberate. Every word measured, like I was observing my own life from a distance, instead of living it. It is strange how quickly the mind adjusts once doubt enters the room, how it rewinds moments you never questioned before and plays them back with a different meaning. The late-night texts Emily used to brush off, the way Ryan sometimes showed up unannounced but always at the right time, the quick glances that never lasted long enough to matter until now, and suddenly, what used to feel like coincidence started to look like a pattern I had simply never bothered to see. I did not confront them, not that night, not even close, because something deeper than anger had taken hold, something colder, more patient, the kind of awareness that tells you acting too soon only gives the truth a chance to hide again. And I was not interested in guesses anymore. I needed certainty, something I could hold in my hands and not explain away. So I watched, quietly, carefully, the way Emily moved through the kitchen, the way Ryan lingered just a second too long before leaving, the way their eyes met when they thought no one was paying attention, and each detail settled into place like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve but could not ignore anymore. That night, after the house went quiet and Emily fell asleep beside me with the same steady breathing that used to bring me comfort, I stared at the ceiling and let the silence stretch, not empty, but heavy with everything I had not said, everything I had not yet confirmed, and somewhere between midnight and the early hours of the morning, I made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. I was not going to ask questions, I was going to find answers, and whatever those answers turned out to be, I would be ready for them. Even if it meant accepting that the people I trusted most had been living a completely different story right in front of me. The next morning did not come with clarity, it came with routine, and routine is the most dangerous thing when something is broken because it convinces you everything is still working, so I followed it, step by step, like I had done for years. Coffee at 6, the same mug with the small chip on the rim, the same quiet kitchen with sunlight spilling across the counter, and Emily moving through it like nothing had changed. Like she had not stood 10 feet away from a sentence that rewrote everything I thought I knew. She kissed my cheek on her way out, light, automatic, the kind of gesture that used to mean something, and I let it happen without reacting, without pulling away, because I needed her to believe the version of me she was used to, the one who did not question, the one who trusted without hesitation. And that meant playing along, at least for now. The moment she left, the house shifted, not physically, but in the way silence fills a space when you are no longer pretending, and I stood there for a second longer than necessary, listening to the absence of her footsteps, the distant hum of her car pulling out of the driveway, and then I moved, not fast, not rushed, just deliberate, like every action needed to mean something from this point forward. I started small, the way you do when you are not ready to face the full truth yet, her phone charger on the nightstand, her laptop on the desk, nothing unusual at first glance, everything exactly where it should be. But I was not looking for something obvious, I was looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything that did not fit the life I had been living. I told myself this was not about invading privacy, it was about confirming reality, because once doubt takes hold, you either ignore it and let it rot or you follow it to the end, no matter where it leads, and I had already made my choice the night before. Her laptop was locked, as expected, but the details around it told their own story, recently used, tabs closed too neatly, the kind of order that feels intentional rather than natural, and I did not try to force my way in, not yet, because forcing things too early only creates noise, and I needed silence, observation, control. Instead, I shifted my attention to what could not hide as easily: timing, movement, behavior, the things people overlook because they feel too small to matter, and that was where the first real crack appeared. Emily had told me she had a client meeting that afternoon, something she had mentioned casually the night before, but when I checked the shared calendar on the fridge, the one we had used for years to keep life organized, it was not there, not written, not noted, nothing. Just an empty space where something should have been, and on its own, that meant nothing. People forget to write things down all the time, but in the context of everything else, it felt different, like a piece that did not belong. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that blank square, letting the weight of it settle, and then I did something I had never done before. I checked Ryan's schedule, not directly, not in any obvious way, but through the same small details, the messages he had sent in the family group chat, the casual mentions of being busy, of having plans, and just like that, another inconsistency surfaced. He had said he would be tied up that afternoon too, same time, same vague explanation. And for the first time since I heard that sentence in the hallway, something shifted from suspicion into alignment, not proof, not confirmation, but enough to make the picture clearer than it had been before. I did not react. I did not call anyone. I did not confront the silence with questions it was not ready to answer. I just stood there, absorbing it, letting it settle into the growing structure of something I could not yet fully see but was starting to understand, and in that moment, I realized this was not going to be a single discovery, it was going to be a process, a slow unraveling of everything I thought was stable, and if I wanted the truth, I would have to be patient enough to let it reveal itself piece by piece, even if every piece made it harder to recognize the life I was still standing in. By the time afternoon settled in, I was no longer looking for answers in obvious places. I was studying patterns, the kind you only notice when you stop assuming everything is normal, and what I saw that day was not dramatic, not the kind of thing you can point at and say this is where it all broke. It was quieter than that, more controlled, like a system that had been running smoothly for a long time without anyone questioning it. Emily texted me around 1:15, said her meeting was running long, nothing unusual about the message itself, the wording was exactly what you would expect, polite, brief. Just enough detail to sound real, and I responded the way I always did, told her not to rush, take her time, because that was the version of me she knew, the one who never doubted, the one who trusted without checking. And I needed her to keep believing that version still existed. A few minutes later, I checked the time again, then Ryan's last message in the group chat, posted just before noon, saying he would be off the grid for the afternoon, busy with something he could not get out of. And that was the second alignment, not proof, but not coincidence either. Two separate explanations that overlapped too cleanly, too conveniently. Like they had been rehearsed, or at least repeated enough times to feel natural. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen without actually seeing it, letting the timeline form in my head. Emily leaves late morning, Ryan disappears around the same time, both unavailable, both vague, and for the first time, I stopped asking whether something was wrong and started asking how long it had been happening. That question does something to you, it shifts the ground under everything you remember, turns ordinary moments into possible evidence. Every late night, every unexplained delay, every time one of them seemed just a little too comfortable in the same space, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that whatever this was, it was not new, it had structure, rhythm, a pattern that had been built slowly, carefully, right in front of me. I left work early that day, not in a rush, not like someone chasing a suspicion, but like someone following a schedule he had finally started to understand, and instead of going home, I parked a block away, far enough that my car would not be obvious, close enough that I could see the driveway without being seen, and I sat there with the engine off. The quiet of the car wrapping around me like a barrier between what I knew and what I was about to confirm. Time moved differently in that moment, slower, heavier, every minute stretching longer than it should, and I told myself I was not waiting for anything specific, not expecting a scene or a revelation, just observing, just letting reality show itself without interference, because forcing the moment would only distort it. Around 3:40, Emily's car pulled into the driveway, smooth, controlled, like any normal return home, and 10 minutes later Ryan's truck passed by, not stopping, not even slowing down, just continuing down the street like he had never been there at all, and if I had not been paying attention, I would have missed it completely, the timing, the distance, the precision of it. Two separate arrivals that never overlapped but lined up too perfectly to ignore. I did not move, did not react, just sat there letting the pattern settle into something more solid than suspicion, something closer to confirmation, not because I had seen everything, but because I had seen enough to understand the shape of what was happening, and as I turned the key and drove away without going inside, one thought stayed with me, steady, unshaken. This was not about catching them in a moment. This was about exposing a system they believed was invisible, and I was just beginning to see how carefully it had been built. I did not go inside that day, not because I was afraid of what I might see, but because I already understood enough to know that walking in too early would only give them time to adjust, to tighten whatever system they had built, and what I needed now was not reaction, it was clarity, something undeniable, something that could not be explained away with a calm voice and a practiced smile. That evening, I returned home at my usual time, not a minute early, not a minute late, and everything looked exactly the way it always did, lights on, dinner half prepared, Emily moving through the kitchen like nothing in the world had shifted, and for a second, if I had not spent the afternoon watching from a distance, I might have believed it again, that this was still my life, still my reality. But once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it, even when it is hidden behind something familiar. She asked about my day again, same tone, same rhythm, and I answered the same way, controlled, steady, giving her nothing to question, nothing to suspect, because the moment she sensed a change in me, everything would change in response, and I was not ready for that yet. Ryan did not come by that night, not physically, but his presence was still there, in the way Emily checked her phone just a little too often, in the way her attention drifted even when we were sitting across from each other, and it was subtle, almost invisible if you were not looking for it, but I was, and every small detail felt louder now. Like a quiet signal repeating itself over and over until you could not ignore it anymore. After dinner, she said she had some work to finish, something she needed to handle before the weekend, and I nodded, told her to take her time, the same words I had used earlier that day, and she disappeared into the other room with her laptop, closing the door just enough to create distance without making it obvious, and that was when I realized how practiced all of this was, how carefully balanced. Just enough separation to hide things, but not enough to raise questions, a system built on precision, not carelessness. I stayed in the living room, the television on but muted, not watching, just listening, not for voices or conversations, but for patterns, movement, the subtle shifts that reveal more than words ever do, and after a while, I heard it, not a conversation, not anything clear, just a faint rhythm of typing that would pause and start again, like someone responding, waiting, responding again. And that rhythm told me more than any message could have, because it meant there was someone on the other side of it, someone consistent enough to create that pattern. I did not get up, did not interrupt, because I did not need to, not yet, instead I let it happen, let the evidence build quietly in ways that could not be erased or denied later, because the truth, when it is real, does not need to be forced, it reveals itself through repetition, through consistency, through the small details people forget to control. That night, when she finally came back to the living room, everything about her looked the same, calm, composed, like nothing unusual had taken place, and she sat beside me like she always did, close enough to feel familiar, distant enough that something unspoken remained between us, and I realized then that whatever this was, it had been going on long enough for her to live inside it without hesitation, without fear. And that meant I was not uncovering something new, I was stepping into something that had already been built, piece by piece, right in front of me. I went to bed that night with a different kind of clarity, not the kind that answers questions, but the kind that sharpens them, and one thought stayed with me as I stared into the dark, steady and unavoidable. If they had built something this careful, this controlled, then there would be a moment where it all came together, a point where the pattern would no longer be subtle, and when that moment came, I would be ready, not to react, but to expose it completely, without giving them a single chance to rewrite the story they thought I was still living in. By the end of that week, I was no longer guessing, I was tracking, not in a way that felt obsessive or frantic, but controlled, deliberate, like I had stepped into a role I never thought I would have to play, and the strange part was how natural it started to feel once I accepted that the version of my life I had trusted was no longer real. I adjusted small things first, nothing obvious, nothing that would raise suspicion, just enough to give me visibility where I needed it, the kind of changes no one notices because they blend into routine, like checking the shared phone account details under the excuse of reviewing our monthly bills, something I had done before without thinking twice, except this time, I was paying attention to patterns instead of totals. Numbers do not lie the way people do, they repeat, they align, they tell a story without emotion, and what I saw there was not dramatic at first, just consistent, repeated contact between two numbers that did not need to be explained because I already knew who they belonged to, Emily and Ryan, and it was not the frequency alone that mattered, it was the timing. Messages and calls lining up perfectly with the gaps I had already started to notice, late mornings, mid-afternoons, the exact windows where both of them were supposedly unavailable for completely unrelated reasons. I did not react when I saw it, not even a flicker, because by then, I had already moved past the stage where confirmation changed anything emotionally. All it did was solidify what I had been building piece by piece, a structure of truth that no denial could break once it was complete. That same night, I made another quiet adjustment, something simple, something practical. I repositioned an old security camera in the garage, one we barely used anymore, under the reason of wanting better coverage after a neighbor mentioned a break-in a few blocks away, and Emily agreed without hesitation, without even asking questions, because to her, I was still the same man who fixed problems, who handled things without making a scene, and that was exactly what I needed her to believe. The camera itself was not the point, it was what it connected to, the ability to review movement, timing, entries and exits, the physical confirmation to match the digital pattern I had already uncovered, because once both aligned, there would be no space left for doubt, no version of the story where this could be explained away as coincidence. Over the next few days, the pattern tightened, not because they became careless, but because I was finally seeing it for what it was, a routine they trusted, one that had worked long enough for them to stop questioning it, and that was their mistake. Not a loud one, not something they would ever notice, but enough for me to map it out completely, Emily leaving at certain hours, Ryan appearing nearby without ever being seen directly at the house. Both of them maintaining just enough distance to avoid overlap, but not enough to break the connection once you knew where to look. I watched it all without interrupting, without confronting, because the truth, when it reaches this level, does not need confrontation, it needs exposure. And exposure requires patience, the kind that holds back reaction in exchange for certainty. One night, sitting alone in the living room while Emily finished another one of her quiet sessions behind a partially closed door, I opened the camera feed and saw something small, almost insignificant if I had not been paying attention, headlights passing slowly in front of the house, not stopping, just enough to mark presence, and a few minutes later, her typing paused, then resumed, and that was it. No dramatic reveal. No obvious mistake, just a perfect synchronization between movement outside and response inside. And in that moment, everything locked into place, not emotionally, not explosively, but with a cold, undeniable clarity that left no room for interpretation. I leaned back in my chair, the quiet of the room settling around me, and for the first time since this started, I did not feel confusion or hesitation, I felt control. Because I was no longer trying to understand what was happening, I already did, and now, the only thing left was deciding how and when to let them realize that I knew, not in a way that invited explanation, but in a way that left no space for it at all. The moment I had been waiting for did not arrive with chaos or raised voices, it came quietly, almost politely, like everything else they had built together, and that was what made it so clear. Because by then I understood their pattern well enough to recognize when it reached its peak. It was Saturday, the kind of day our family usually gathered, the kind of day built on tradition, food on the table, laughter in the background, the illusion of something solid holding everyone together, and Emily was already moving through the house early that morning, preparing, checking details, playing her role perfectly, while I stood there watching her with a calm I did not recognize in myself. Not because I felt nothing, but because I had already moved past the point where emotion changed anything. Ryan arrived just after noon, like he always did, casual, confident, stepping into the house like it was his own space, greeting everyone with the same easy energy that had always made him feel trustworthy, and I watched him the same way I had been watching everything else, not reacting, not giving anything away, just observing the small details that now stood out more than ever. The way his eyes found Emily for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, the way she adjusted her posture when he entered the room, subtle, controlled, but impossible to ignore once you knew what to look for. The house filled with voices, family members moving through rooms, conversations overlapping, the familiar chaos of people who believed they were safe in the same space, and for a moment, I let it all play out, let the scene build naturally, because this was not just about them anymore, it was about the entire system they existed in, the environment that had allowed this to continue without question, without interruption. At some point in the afternoon, Emily excused herself, said she needed to check on something upstairs, a normal statement, one no one questioned, and a few minutes later, Ryan followed, not immediately, not in a way that would draw attention, just enough delay to make it seem unrelated, and if I had not been tracking their timing for days I might have missed it, but I did not, I saw it exactly for what it was. Another repetition of the same pattern, just now happening in a house full of people who had no idea what was unfolding just above them. I did not rush after them, I did not make a scene, because this was not about catching them in the act, it was about confirming the final piece, the one that removed any remaining doubt, and I gave it a few minutes, just enough time for the pattern to complete itself, before I moved, slow, steady, like I was simply heading upstairs for something ordinary, blending into the flow of the house the same way they had been blending into it all along. The hallway was quiet compared to the noise below, the kind of quiet that feels intentional when you know what is being hidden inside it, and as I approached the partially closed door, I did not hesitate, I did not second-guess what I already knew, I just listened, and there it was, not a dramatic confession, not anything loud or obvious, just a low conversation. Familiar voices speaking in a tone that did not belong to casual interaction, a level of closeness that did not need explanation. Because it explained itself. I stood there for a second, not long, just enough to let the reality settle into something permanent, something that could not be undone or reinterpreted later, and in that moment, everything aligned completely, the patterns, the timing, the messages, the movements, all of it leading to this exact point, not as a surprise, but as confirmation. I did not open the door, I did not interrupt, because I did not need to anymore, the truth was already complete. And as I turned away from that hallway and walked back downstairs into the noise and laughter of a family that believed nothing had changed, one thought stayed with me, steady and absolute. They thought this was hidden, they thought it was controlled, but they had just given me everything I needed to end it on my terms, not with emotion, not with confrontation, but with something far more final, exposure. By the time the sun started to dip and the golden light settled across the backyard, the house felt exactly the way it always had during these gatherings, full, loud, comfortable, the kind of environment where no one expects anything to break, and that was precisely why it was the perfect moment, not because it would cause the most damage, but because it would leave no room for denial. I moved through the crowd the same way I had all day, calm, steady, stopping to exchange a few words here and there, letting the normal rhythm continue uninterrupted. Because the more natural everything felt, the harder the truth would land when it finally surfaced. Emily came back downstairs a few minutes after I had returned, composed, effortless, her expression exactly as it should be, and Ryan followed not long after, carrying himself with that same casual confidence, like nothing had happened, like the entire afternoon was just another sequence in a routine they had perfected, and I watched them both take their places back in the room as if nothing had ever been out of place. And that was the moment I knew they believed they were still in control. Dinner came together the way it always did, plates passed around, conversations overlapping, laughter rising and falling in waves, and I waited, not because I was unsure, but because timing matters when you are about to change the entire structure of a room, and rushing it would only dilute the impact. When everyone finally settled, when the noise softened just enough to be replaced by the steady rhythm of people eating and talking, I stood up. Not abruptly, not in a way that demanded attention, just enough to shift the energy slightly, enough for a few people to glance in my direction, and then a few more, until the room naturally quieted without anyone fully understanding why. I picked up my phone, not dramatically, not like a weapon, just another object in my hand, and I spoke the same way I had been speaking all day, calm, controlled, steady, the kind of tone that does not invite interruption because it does not sound emotional. I said I had something I wanted to share, something important, and there was a brief pause, the kind that comes when people expect a toast or a light announcement, something harmless, something that fits the setting, and in that pause, I let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to settle into it. Then I connected my phone to the television in the living room, something simple, something we had done before for photos or videos, nothing unusual about the action itself, and as the screen lit up, I did not look at Emily, I did not look at Ryan, I kept my focus on the screen, because this was not about watching their reaction yet, it was about letting the truth speak first. The video started quietly, just a sequence of timestamps, movements, small details that on their own meant nothing, but together formed a pattern too precise to ignore, the entries, the exits, the timing, the alignment between two separate lives that were supposed to have nothing to do with each other in those moments, and as it played, the room shifted, not loudly, not with immediate shock, but with a growing awareness that something was not right. No one spoke, no one laughed, the background noise that had filled the house all day faded into something heavier, something uncertain, and I let it continue, did not rush to explain, did not interrupt the evidence with words, because explanation weakens clarity, and clarity was all I needed. When the video ended, the screen went still, and the silence that followed was different from before, no longer casual, no longer comfortable. It was the kind of silence that forces people to look at each other, to search for understanding in a space where none is offered. That was when I finally looked up, not at the room, not at the family, but directly at Emily and Ryan, and for the first time since this began, I let the moment rest there, not with anger, not with accusation, just with the weight of something that had already been proven, and in that stillness, it became clear that whatever control they thought they had was already gone, replaced by something far more final, the truth, laid out in front of everyone without a single word needing to justify it. No one spoke at first, not because they did not have something to say, but because the kind of truth that had just filled the room does not leave space for immediate reactions, it forces people into silence, into processing something they were not prepared to see, and I stood there without rushing to fill that silence, because it was doing exactly what it needed to do. Emily's face had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would draw attention from across the room, but enough that anyone close could see it. The composure she carried all day was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched over something that no longer fit, and Ryan, for the first time since I had known him, did not look comfortable. His posture shifted, his confidence no longer effortless, just slightly off balance, like he had stepped into a situation he could not control with words or timing. Someone at the table cleared their throat, another shifted in their seat, the small sounds of discomfort that follow a moment no one knows how to navigate, and still, I did not raise my voice, I did not point, I did not accuse, because everything that needed to be said had already been shown. I set my phone down slowly, the screen going dark, and finally spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just clear enough for everyone to hear without effort. I said I was not here to argue. I was not here to listen to explanations, because explanations require doubt, and I did not have any left. The words hung in the air for a second, not heavy, not aggressive, just final, like a door closing without being slammed, and I let them sit there before continuing, because timing matters even in something like this. I said that trust, once broken at this level, does not get repaired with apologies or promises, it does not get negotiated or rewritten, it ends clean, simple, without discussion, and I could feel the room shifting again, not because people disagreed, but because they understood what that meant. Emily finally spoke my name, soft at first, like she was trying to reach the version of me that used to respond, but I did not look at her, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to resolve in that direction, and when Ryan tried to say something next, something about misunderstanding or timing or context, I did not let him finish, not by interrupting, but by simply not engaging. Because once the truth is clear, explanations are just noise. I picked up my keys from the counter, the same keys I had been holding the night this started, and for a brief second, I looked around the room, not at individuals, but at the space itself, the house, the people, the structure that had allowed all of this to exist without question, and I realized something that felt colder than anger. This was not just about two people, it was about everything connected to them, every moment that now carried a different meaning, every memory that no longer felt the same. I said one more thing before I left, not directed at anyone in particular, but clear enough for everyone to understand. I said I was done, not just with them, but with all of it, the entire system, the assumptions, the trust, everything that had been built on something that was not real. No one tried to stop me, not physically, not even with words that carried weight, because they could feel it, the finality of it, the absence of hesitation, and that was something no argument could change. I walked out the same way I had walked in that day, steady, controlled, not looking back, because there was nothing behind me worth revisiting anymore, and as the door closed quietly, without force, without drama, I understood something with absolute clarity. Walking away was not losing anything, it was the only way to make sure I did not stay in something that had already been gone long before I realized it.